Good morning. Welcome to the plantation. I'm your slave master, Lucian. Yeah, I've been taking a break as I had a loss in the family and I'm still going to grieve about it. However, I will do that in my own time and in my own way whatsoever. So I do appreciate anyone that wants to show support. You may gladly comment or you may privately email me or DM me, whichever suits the cause or the need. So we're going to talk about a unique particular topic. This includes vehicle manufacturing, as everyone ever wondered as to why South Africa cannot manufacture a proudly South African vehicle, and on top of that, why is it not happening? We see on our roads vehicles like Volkswagen branded, Mercedes Benz, to name a few, Toyota as well, just to name a few. These are just some of the prominent vehicle brands that our esteemed South Africans are always purchasing. And ironically, South Africa doesn't produce a proudly South African car that is branded with a South African name and that is traded and sold to African countries. Very, very interesting. And these are just some of the conversations that I feel that needs to take place, whereby we need to let our trade agreements, we need to seize them, because in all fairness, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with buying a vehicle that was produced in South Africa. However, import duties and the tax on these vehicles are crazy. The tariffs are crazy. So a vehicle gets produced here in South Africa, exported, then that very same exported vehicle then gets traded and sold back to South Africa, and then we pay a hefty amount on import duties, whereas the vehicle was produced here. Should it not be the case of where something is produced locally? Well, let's look at the part of localization. Surely, if it's produced locally, we should be paying a fraction of what the car cost is to have the car used on our roads and also licensed to be used on South African roads. But this is not the case. South Africa has some trade agreements with a few vehicle manufacturers, and I cannot understand. This same point was mentioned by Julius Malema. This was also mentioned by a whole bunch of other people. However, experts, especially coming from the automotive industry, there's an article on MoneyWeb, I think it's dated sometime in March 2024. This is a gentleman, I think he's one of the directors of Imperial Holdings before their unbundling, and he was also the former chief executive or group director of the automotive industry body. Can't get to the exact abbreviation, I will need to check it out, but I glanced through the article, and it's a subscriber paid article that is on MoneyWeb. You can Google it, this is actually there, but it's purely for subscribers, where he states that South Africa needs to catch up with the electrical vehicle market and also the type of vehicles that we are producing. There's a certain manufacturing standard that needs to be adhered by. Now, I've pulled up some data, or should I say, I pulled up some research, because I was just curious as to why we are not producing our own proudly South African vehicle that is branded and named South African. Well, we can't name the car South African, let's just be real here. But nonetheless, we don't have a vehicle that is produced that represents the heritage of South Africa, and neither do we have a vehicle in the automotive industry that is technically named after us, produced by us, and then exported by us to our African trading partners. We don't have that. Now, according to the research and information that I managed to find, this is now from NEDLAC. So I'm going to take a few inserts of what our vehicle exports look like in the year 2024, and then I'm just going to give you a little bit of understanding as to what are these trade agreements all about. Should we let go of the trade agreements, or should we continue keeping the trade agreements? I think that is what we also need to understand. As much as South Africa has a trade agreement or multiple trade agreements with various vehicle manufacturers, we also need to understand, is it viable for us to move away from the trade agreement that we have and then start manufacturing our own vehicles in the automotive sector that is proudly South African but also named and holds a name that is South African, so that we can export that particular vehicle, which will represent the identity of South Africa. I mean, we are producing world-class vehicles, no doubt, but surely, why are we not unlocking the manufacturing sector in South Africa, especially automotive, which counts for a huge part of our spend? However, it would be nice to see a vehicle produced by South Africans and named after South Africa and exported on the continent. I'm saying that our counterparts on the African continent will not be saying that we do not like anything South African. They love our women. Surely they'll love our cars. And surely, because it's produced by an African country, why would people on the continent not support each other when we are manufacturing something that represents the root and the heritage of Africa? So let's check what is happening with regards to this particular non-talking topic. It's not in the mainstream news. It's here and there, a few tidbits, but it's not something that people are conversing about. Yes, we are focusing on a lot of social and economic ills in South Africa, but we need to have the more in-depth conversations where we need a breakthrough. For example, the automotive industry, that could really result in a massive breakthrough should these type of dialogues be held, whereby we can have industry experts on board, we can understand what the requirements are to unlock the vehicle manufacturing in South Africa, and also possibly annex all the trade agreements that we have with major vehicle brand companies, manufacturing companies for that matter. If we can annex those agreements and make it more fluid, that South Africa benefits on a large proportionate scale, then we could actually start exporting our raw talent and our skills on the continent and also create something completely industrial, an automotive vehicle. Who wouldn't be proud of driving a proudly South African car named after South Africa on South African roads? Who would not want to be part of something amazing and magnificent like that? In all fairness, I think it's something that we should have a in-depth discussion about, and it's something that we should consider exploring. Now, I've picked up some research. I'm going to just take a few inserts from this particular point. Let's have a look. So this is according to NEDLAC. This is in 2024. This was published on May the 12th. The source is www.persfin.co.za. Motoring industry news. South Africa has 5 car export heroes, but will the industry survive the EV era? EV, electrical vehicle era. That is what they're referring to. So I guess moving away from ordinary petroleum vehicles to electric vehicles is also another hot contesting topic, especially in the manufacturing sector, or should I say specifically automotive industry. Let's check this one out. So, which cars are South Africa's export heroes? This is what they say. Which cars are South Africa's export heroes? So the cars that are deemed export heroes, according to the first quarter figures from January to March 2024, the Volkswagen Polo is currently in pole position. How weird. Volkswagen Polo in pole position. Doesn't that sound catchy? With 42,268 export sales, followed by Mercedes-Benz C-Class at 16,168 and BMW X3 at 16,154 units. Interesting. Below that, we also see the likes of the Buckies, the Ford Ranger, 14,180, beating the Toyota Hilux, 8,955. So kudos to Ford Ranger. They've maneuvered their rivals. Those numbers are largely driven by European exports, but Isuzu and Nissan are also slowly making inroads into African markets, with export figures of 1,562 and 1,209 for the first quarter, respectively. Interesting, the Toyota Corolla 355 and the Fortuner 309 also enjoy a small export following. So now we need to understand, what does the future hold for our car factories? What does the future hold? We do know that South Africa is, or at some point will be entering the electrical vehicle market. But has anyone thought of what the impact of the electrical vehicle will be on the automotive industry? Let's understand why and what could be the case in point of this particular change. South Africa's vehicle manufacturing industry has come a long way since apartheid. Days of ironclad protectionism, when exports were almost non existent and manufacturers churned out multiple models, each at significantly lower volumes than today. But following the introduction of incentive programs like the Motor Industry Development Plan, MIDP, Motor Industry Development Plan, MIDP, of 1995, and the Automotive Production and Development Program, APDP, Automotive Production Development Program, APDP, that replaced it. Most manufacturing have adopted a strategy of producing just one or two models at much higher volumes for export. So according to these two things, the Motor Industry Development Plan, MIDP of 1995, and the Automotive Production and Development Program, APDP, replaced the previous way of manufacturing vehicles in South Africa. Now they're only producing one or two notches more of quantity so that they can export these vehicles at a much more higher rate. That's according to these particular programs that were established. Thanks to the Continental Free Trade Agreement with the European Union, keywords: European Union, continental, not continental, because this is not African. This is with the European Union. Let's not get it twisted. The free trade agreement with the European Union and duty-free access to the United States with the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, or should I say, as many know it, AGOA. South African vehicle exports have thrived since the early 2000s. Now these are two key things: the free trade agreement with the European Union and also the AGOA treaty as well, or should I say AGOA trade agreement. Now, according to this information that's published by NEDLAC in this article, or should I say their research and their findings, they state that South African vehicle manufacturing industry has been thriving since the year, or should I say since the early 2000s. Today, around 2/3 of all vehicles produced in South Africa are exported abroad. 2/3 of every vehicle produced in this country is exported abroad. Can we not produce 2/3 of proudly South African vehicles and export it to African countries? Makes one wonder. Now, according to this particular article, once again, Treasury, Europe and the UK absorb almost half of all our auto production. So this states that Europe and the UK absorbs almost half of our entire auto production. So any vehicles from those 2/3 that we produce and that we export to the United States as well as to the broader Europe markets, two-thirds, or should I say almost half of that two-thirds production that we manufacture is absorbed by the European Union markets as well as the broader UK. Interesting fact. But what's currently keeping many auto executives up at night is that both the United Kingdom and the European Union are planning to ban the sales of new internal combustion vehicles from 2035. New internal combustion vehicles are basically your ordinary petroleum vehicles, if I'm not mistaken. So now, with this ban coming into effect in 2035, that means we can no longer produce these types of vehicles because, as per the 2035 agreement in place, this production of these type of vehicles will have to stop. Now, this could be a negative knock-on effect on South Africa's automotive industry. I'm not sure what will happen. It could result in a bloodbath of jobs. It could also result in declining manufacturing in the automotive industry. And on top of that, it could also reduce the quality of our exports because now we have to transition into a different way of manufacturing vehicles other than the internal combustion vehicles that we have been manufacturing all along. Now, I'm not saying that we need to disregard the environment. We need to do everything within our means to protect the environment. Let's not forget that. However, these type of agreements are always shorthand. It's always dictated and decided by the elite business leaders, or should I say the elite business automotive industry executives that lobby the government for these types of favorable and tradable conditions. Let's not forget that. The very same people that is alienating the industry to a certain point, which wants to benefit via trade because of their unique position, are the same people that are also destroying and deindustrializing and also shrinking the automotive industry to a certain point because of these changes that they want to apply unanimously. Not only for the benefit of themselves, but for all their allies and those that support South Africa's automotive vehicle manufacturing market. Now, what this means for South Africa is that if South Africa does not start building electrical cars by the early 2030s, our entire vehicle manufacturing industry could implode. Let me just read that again, verbatim. If South Africa does not start building electric cars by the early 2030s, our entire vehicle manufacturing industry could implode. Now remember, I said a few seconds ago, jobs bloodbath, decline in the manufacturing sector, especially automotive industry, due to a change like this. Now remember, this change needs to be achieved by 2035. And they're expecting South Africa to transition to this by, or should I say, in the early 2030s. Now, currently, our government is binded by these agreements. I'm not an automotive expert. I'm not an industrial expert, but I can see what the knock-on effect of these types of agreements could have on South Africa's automotive industry. It's not something that I wish for, it's not something that I would want, and definitely not something that I would agree to. However, I feel that the government needs to reconsider and review and possibly terminate most of these trade agreements, especially with the European Union and the UK, as well as the United States. I'm not saying that it's bad for business for South Africa not to export its vehicles to global markets, but we also need to understand, as much as that fancy VW or Toyota, whatever brand that is manufactured here in South Africa gets exported to global markets, we must also understand what is the benefit to South Africa. We're buying these cars and paying an exorbitant amount of money for them, yet they are assembled and manufactured here. Firstly and foremost, the consumer is not saving money on purchasing these vehicles. Instead, The consumer is fueling these multinational corporations, or should I say these multinational vehicle companies that are benefiting from the stronghold of South Africa's automotive industry. If we could produce a vehicle that is assembled in South Africa, named after South Africa, represents the quality as shown in the other cars that we export, surely we can have a look at what our agreements are and actually probably terminate them and revive the automotive industry. According to this published by Nedlac, remember this article clearly states that if South Africa does not transition and start manufacturing electrical vehicles by the early 2030s, the entire automotive industry could implode. Now that is something I do not want to see. We're producing world-class vehicles. I definitely do not want to see this entire industry go down the drain just because of a few countries that want to force South Africa to move into the electrical vehicle transition. Just the same like the energy coal transition, where a loan amount was granted to South Africa. I think it's a tune of $8.5 billion, if I'm not mistaken. I just need to double check my figures. Now, this particular loan that was granted to South Africa is whereby a few of the Western allies and Western countries, majority of them are probably members of COP, climate change. So they gave a donation to South Africa, informing South Africa that they need to transition away from fossil fuels, or should I say, move away from coal to more greener and more cleaner and more renewable energy. Now we could understand that under the leadership of Eskom, the notorious Mr. Andre de Ruyter, that could never run a power utility state company. Under his leadership and under his management, we had the highest number of load shedding hours in the country since the history of Eskom. Second to that, he also closed down, if I'm not mistaken, 2 critical power stations, one in Komati, if I'm not mistaken, and another. So now we ask ourselves this question. The very same people that are trying to pioneer South Africa from moving from the internal combustion vehicles to the EV market, electrical vehicle markets, are the very same multinational corporations, or should I say that form part of the donors and the funders of COP, or climate change, for South Africa to transition from coal to renewable energies. Doesn't that ring a bell as to why Andre de Ruyter closed down those power stations that were perfectly manageable? Doesn't that make one wonder as to why under Andre de Ruyter's leadership that they were pushing for higher tariff fees on solar? Doesn't that ring a bell as to why the constant advocation for renewable and green energy in South Africa? And doesn't that ring a bell as to the IPP, Independent Power Producers, the connected black elite, like your one and only Patrice Motsepe, Cyril Ramaphosa, the head of state? Doesn't that make one wonder what is really at play here? Is it really South Africa moving to greener energy or cleaner energy? Or is there a big benefit waiting in the back? And for example, Penwell mentioned this on his show. And also the lady that wrote the article in IOL, that a portion of this money was given as grants and then the rest of the funding went to the donors. Now, the very same institutions or very same financiers of this deal will now have to account and pay back this money. How can you lend money for the sake of transitioning from coal to renewable energy, and then that very same money that you're given as grants, you expect that very same country to pay that money back? That makes no mathematical sense to me. Because the donors of these funds, it wasn't in the form of a loan. It was in the form of a grant. A grant is usually used to enable a means. So, for example, we want to move over to renewable energy. We would use the partial funding received from this particular just energy transition. So we could fund and move away from coal to more cleaner and renewable energy. However, the grant funding is now given as a loan to South Africa, and therefore South Africa has to pay this money back. I'm going to do more research on this particular instance because I just need to find out the specifics as to how much money was used. And as you know, our government cannot always be trusted. When it comes to money, these people love chowing. Same thing here. As much as the government loves chowing and the connected elite within the government that loves chowing, we have the same scenario happening in the private sector. The industry leaders, the industry executives of these top multinational companies in the automotive industry, they are too chowing because they are enforcing these types of agreements on the South African government. So therefore, when you have a comparable advantage over another country, or when you have a comparable competitive advantage over another country, especially in critical areas such as manufacturing and automotive, you automatically will use your comparative advantage to your best knowledge and also exploit it so that you, with a competitive advantage, supersedes the outcome that has to be balanced and benefit everyone involved. So in this particular instance, by force, if South Africa does not move over to the electrical vehicle market in the early 2030s, we're going to see the automotive industry implode in South Africa. Now, who's benefiting from this? Not South Africa. Now, back to the initial article. Factoring in the current power constraints and the lucrative fuel levies, the state does not want to encourage South Africa to buy electric cars anytime soon. Interesting. The state does not want to encourage South Africans to buy electrical cars anytime soon, which is why it hasn't followed the lead of many other nations in incentivizing them. As it announced in the 2024 budget speech, the government is introducing producing incentives for electrical vehicles from 2026. So I guess the first incentives that's going to arrive for electrical vehicles in South Africa will be in 2026. Kudos to all the EV users. Purchase incentives for local buyers, it says, will only kick in during phase 2, likely later in the decade. When announcing South Africa's EV white paper in December 2023, Trade Minister Ibrahim Patel said that his party was expecting the country to produce its first electrical vehicle as early as 2026. Now, according to the white paper in December 2023, that means South Africa will potentially produce its first electrical vehicle potentially by 2026. That's according to the white paper. When announcing South Africa's electrical vehicle, do they know something that we don't? It is intriguing, and indeed it is a possibility. Trade Minister Patel stated, but to date, no local manufacturer has made an announcement to that effect. Yes, the government is optimistic, trade and industry is optimistic, and they would love to have their own electric vehicle made by the year 2026. However, with the current conditions at hand, no manufacturer has come forward and made an announcement that they are willing and capable to fulfill that promise as indicated by former Minister of Trade and Industry, Ibrahim Patel. Furthermore, VW South Africa CEO Martina Bien says the plant will focus on serving the African market going forward, and a 4 billion rand investment was recently announced for the production of a new budget SUV in the plant from 2027. But without significant export, it's hard to imagine that this introduction will see the plant's volumes maintained once the Polo exports dry up. It is worrying that South Africa is so reliant on vehicle exports to Europe, but perhaps there is some sense in forging trade agreements with other regions that are also likely to be slow to electrify, such as South America and Australasia. This is just a thought. Now, on that particular analysis and on that particular article that was published by NEDLAC, as I mentioned earlier, we need to understand the severity of our automotive industry. If South Africa does not produce an electrical vehicle by the early 2030s, our entire automotive industry could implode. And on top of that, if we do not follow through on that white paper that was published December 2023, therefore stating the objective of South Africa producing its first electric vehicle homegrown by 2026, we are completely fucked beyond that point. Because in the current age, no vehicle manufacturer has come forward to say that that particular objective will be met, and the government has set the bar that this should be achievable by 2026. But we do understand things can drag and things can run its course. But in all fairness, I do not want the automotive industry to collapse, and neither do I want people to feel insecure. I'm all for South Africa producing its own vehicle. I'm all for South Africa exporting its vehicle to African countries, and I'm all for it us supporting and localizing the automotive industry. Because if we can produce a nice VW, a nice Mercedes-Benz, a nice Audi, why can we not produce something South African that represents us as a people, that represents our uniqueness? Why can we not support potential manufacturers or potential startups that want to actually change the game in automotive manufacturing vehicle industry of South Africa? So I'm all support of this. Our government, yes, they might drag its feet to a certain extent. But if this is possible, we might see the first electric vehicle in 2026. That's roughly less than 2 years from now. What a great time to be alive. Oh, and on a more happier note, happy birthday to Cyril Ramaphosa. His 72nd birthday. What do you think of our leaders? Our leaders turning 70 odd. Where are the young people in South Africa? It just shows the old people don't give a damn about us young people, especially young ones like ourselves that are doing amazing things in our community, that are doing amazing things beyond our community, that are constantly going against the grind and going against the status quo. Well, with all due respect, he's our head of state. Happy birthday, Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. I hope that you had a wonderful birthday. You celebrated your 72nd birthday. You ate a fat slice of cake. Or should I say, you ate a fat slice of tender. Let's not be funny now. And that you had the spoils and all the right people around you. Happy birthday, Mr. Ramaphosa. And before you're heading into the G20 summit, please give your comrades a piece of that cake. Once again, thank you for listening to this broadcast, and thank you for visiting the plantation. I'm your master, Lucian. Remember, Joshua Maponga stated this clearly. Jobs are for slaves. We are supposed to be masters. Never forget that.